Our exclusive guest today from London is Tom DeWaal. Tom, thank you for this interview. We see that after the end of the war over Nagorno-Karabakh, hostilities didn't end. The military confrontation has now new geography. I can say it moved back from formerly Nagorno-Karabakh front line to Soviet borders between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Now the confrontation and military standoff is getting worse and worse, and we see that it is very intense in Sunni region. What is happening and why the Azeris are so aggressive in Sunni region, you think? By the way, not only Armenians are reporting violations of their borders in Gegharkunik and Sunni region, but also I have some accounts, independent accounts, independent sources proving that Azeris indeed violated Armenian border and penetrated to the Armenian territory a couple of miles. Please, your comment.
Yes, well, first of all, very good to talk to you, Harry, and to Radio Liberty, as always. Yes, it seems that the big fighting was over last year, but the conflict certainly continues at a lower level, unfortunately. And as you rightly said, the geography has changed. The fighting, we're still seeing exchanges of fire on the Armenia-Azerbaijan border in Syunik, in Gegharkunik, and also around Yerevan, between Yerevan and Nakhchivan, which, of course, those of us with longer memories recall was the scene of fighting back in January 1990. So yes, and what's going on? Well, I think what we're seeing from the Azerbaijani side is an attempt to kind of enforce their vision of a new enforced peace on Azerbaijani terms, which means putting pressure on the Armenian side in as much as they can until they meet resistance, and they meet a bit of resistance from the Armenian forces, but they continue to enforce what they see as their vision of a peace, which involves their vision that the corridor between western Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan should run via Mehri or Syunik region, that they must get back the enclaves, the exclaves that they lost at the end of the Soviet period, the Azerbaijani exclaves in Armenia. And probably most importantly, they want to force the Armenian side to give up its claims to Nagorno-Karabakh itself. So this offer, basically, if we recognize your territorial integrity, we stop, recognize the borders, Armenia, Azerbaijan, then the Armenian side must give up its claims for Artsakh, for Karabakh, and recognize the internationally recognized territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. I think this is the Azerbaijani strategy as we see it.
Yeah, we will talk about that a little bit later. But how would you possibly interpret Aliyev's statements on taking back, as he claims, historical lands of Azerbaijan? He's including in these claims even Zangezur, Lake Sevan, as well as Yerevan, capital city of Armenia, which he calls Yerevan. What's your take on this? Why is he doing this?
Yeah, I find this a bit hard to interpret, because obviously this contradicts what I was just saying about territorial integrity. So I see this probably also as a kind of bargaining tactic by the Azerbaijani president. On the one hand, he is putting pressure on Armenia by these kind of statements. On the other hand, he is also satisfying a domestic audience, particularly the so-called Yeraz group in Azerbaijan, which is quite powerful, people who are the descendants of those born, Azerbaijan is born in Armenia. But certainly this is a new, the intensity of these statements is something a bit new. I would, remind you that Heydar Aliyev, the current president's father, former president, he was always talking about Azerbaijan within its recognized borders. There was no indication there of talking about expanding either into Iran, as Abul Faz El-Chibay, his predecessor, did, or these claims on Armenian Zangezur. So it's a little strange how to interpret this. I don't really take it seriously, but of course these statements continue. So I see it more as a kind of a rather tough pressure on the Armenian side.
I guess, Tom, he's a little bit obsessed with his, military superiority over Armenian military, and he's, in every occasion, wherever he goes, visits the territories that he took back, he always says something extraordinary. What do you think?
Well, certainly, no one can deny that President Aliyev scored a major political military victory, obviously last year with the support of Turkey, obviously, and this is his legacy. That he's been in power since 2003, and 17 years later he achieved something quite remarkable. So this is, I think, the source of his legitimacy in Azerbaijan. There are other problems in Azerbaijan, particularly economy is very fragile, very vulnerable to oil shocks. If the price of oil goes down, as we know, 60% of the budget is reliant basically on oil and gas revenues. Suddenly that's a big shock for Azerbaijan. So this is the source of his legitimacy, this victory over the Armenians. So he's not going to give that up easily. He's not going to stop the pressure on the Armenians until he gets significant resistance to this idea of this vision of what he wants to see as the kind of post-conflict settlement in the region.
Tommy, one thing is talking about, taking back the territories that were part of your country, but now if he starts, threatening Armenia, taking back as if these territories were Azeri lands, it will meet with international condemnation. Do you think he realizes all this, or he doesn't care about that? He's just posturing a heroic stance and, taking pictures with his wife in camouflage. How could you possibly explain these things? He's pretty much, I think he's sophisticated enough to understand that these claims are ridiculous.
Well, I think President Aliyev is very self-confident. He sees that people told him not to go to war repeatedly. He ignored that advice, and now he certainly achieved what many thought was quite impossible last year. So he's very self-confident. He has the support of Turkey, and Russia sometimes pushes back and sometimes doesn't. As we know, Russia is doing this balancing act in the South Caucasus. Russia, I think it's safe to say, is using the situation to not so much to protect Armenia, but to improve its own presence and position in the region. So I think Mr. Aliyev will keep on pressing, keep on trying until either he fails or he gets what he wants.
Mm-hmm. Why tensions are rising on Nakhichevan border in Yerazk section? What's the reason? This is completely different, geography, right? And is it possible that Turks are also involved there? As we know, they're very much integrated with Turkish security, Turkish military. Is there any Turkish element involved there, or you think it's just another border tension?
Difficult to say. The Turks are certainly present in Nakhchivan. There are a presence there. There's also, of course, the exclave, very sensitive point of Tigraneshen, Kaki, as the Azerbaijanis call it, which is just north of Nakhchivan on the main road there. So and this was always a crossroads, and as I just mentioned, Yarakh was the location of fighting back in January 1990. So there's nothing new here. I guess the question really is more which I ask myself is is the United States in particular going to exert its role, play its role as a significant partner of both countries and also as a co-chair of the Minsk group and be more vocal. But so far we've seen very little of that. Maybe only if there's, I think, a greater escalation, maybe we will see more significant intervention by the Western powers, unfortunately.
Yeah, what are the Azeri intentions, do you think? It seems to me that they want a corridor connecting Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan through the Syunik region, while Armenia is suggesting that they have to be given the right to cross through the roads and highways on the Armenian territory, existing ones, as Armenians should get the right to cross the Azeri territory through highways and railways. And we don't know what Russians want on so-called Zangezur corridor. I guess Russians would want to control the roads as well by deploying security forces along the road, along the highways, creating checkpoints. What do you think?
Well, this is again, I think, a mystery. We had this trilateral three-government commission begun in January with the deputy prime ministers on this issue of transport connectivity. As we know, what the Azerbaijani vision is a corridor across Syunik, Zangezur, maybe across Megri, the shortest possible distance. We know the Armenian vision, which is it should go north from Ijevan to Kazakh. It should be more on Armenian territory that has greater benefit for the Armenian side. But what the Russian position is, I think it's still not clear. Again, I think the Russians, as long as they have some significant economic investment there, as long as it can be used as a north-south corridor for Russia, which connects Russia to Armenia, Russia to Turkey and Iran, not via Georgia, but via Armenia, Azerbaijan, then the Russians will be happy. But we're not seeing, I don't think we're seeing a clear message from the Russians there, which I think is one reason why there's a lot of tension, because we don't really know what the Russians have decided.
And what do you think about Russian peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh? Are they there to stay also? As we see, more Russian troops will be deployed along Armenian-Azeri border in the Geghar-Kunik region. What is happening here? Is Russia expanding its military might in the region, preparing for something, or is just an interesting for Russia to expand its military base in the region?
Again, I find it hard to say. Clearly, Russia wants to be the arbiter. It wants to be there on the ground. It wants to have its forces on the ground. It's happy to see the Western countries marginalized. But what is the future of the peacekeeping force in Karabakh? Clearly, the Russians would like to stay. Azerbaijan, formally, as we know, has a veto power on the extension of that mission in 2025, so in 4 years' time. This will be a lot of bargaining between Moscow and Baku. I'm sure Russia will come up with lots of convincing arguments why it should stay, but as we know, that mission is also unpopular in Azerbaijan. So I think it's just too early to say what will happen. But unfortunately for the Armenians of Karabakh, this is unfortunately basically something beyond their control. And
Aliyev praised Russia's role in making it possible for them to take back territories. They don't hide it, that Russian actions during the war were very helpful for Baku. But now they are expressing concern that Russia might start arming Armenians again. Alif, in his last week's interview to CNN Turk, said that he is concerned about statements of Sergei Shoigu on starting process of arming Armenia, modernizing Armenian army. What do you say about this?
Well, I think, again, this speaks to everything we've been talking about, the balancing role of Russia, that it's a bit with Armenia, a bit with Azerbaijan, that it balances between them, and therefore neither country is fully happy with Russia. And also this bargaining process, which will go on and has been going on for years and will continue, and is now particularly intense between Moscow and Baku, about the presence of Russian troops, these presence of Russian troops in Karabakh. So this, every interview, every statement has a little bit of this, a little bit about how we support the Russians, but we're not happy with them. And I guess the same is true on the Armenian side, that they see Russia as a stabilizing force, but they're also unhappy with many of the other actions from Russia. And so long as Russia is the only country which is prepared to be strong, to intervene, to send troops, I'm afraid this is what the politics of this region will be for the next few years.
You mean, Russia is still not interested in a peace deal, in signing a peace agreement between two countries? If it was a long thought that Russia is not interested in getting Nagorno-Karabakh conflict resolved, now suddenly some experts believe that Russia wants to solve this conflict. But it's hard to believe that this could happen so quickly. And if that happens, Russia will lose all kinds of leverages over Azerbaijan and Armenia. What's your analysis on that?
Well, there's this famous statement from the Russian foreign minister in the 19th century. I'm trying to remember exactly what it says, but Russia is not sulking, Russia is thinking. I think Russia is playing a long game here. It wants to see stability. Obviously, it doesn't want to see another war. Russia wants to reinforce the Russian presence there. So, if there's some kind of agreement which guarantees the maintenance of Russian forces in the region, then Russia will embrace that agreement. But I don't think Russia is in a hurry to have a peace agreement. But what they really want is a kind of period of stabilization of the status quo and of consolidation of the Russian presence.
Now Aliyev wants Pashinyan to recognize Azeri territorial integrity, after which he said Azerbaijan will sign peace agreement with Armenia. But recognizing Azeri territorial integrity means to recognize Artsakh as part of Azeri territory, which Pashinyan can't do. He's asking Pashinyan for something, knowing that it won't be possible to do. Well, what is the end game here? What is it trying to achieve?
Well, I think he's I guess that the Azerbaijani side is trying to slowly weaken the Armenian influence over Karabakh, and by putting pressure on Armenia itself, he's encouraging Mr. Pashinyan to focus on Armenia and less on Karabakh, maybe. And I think that strategy is perhaps being successful. That while all these problems with Junik and Gegard Junik and so on, Mr. Pashinyan is not really thinking so much about Karabakh. So maybe that's the tactic, and to keep up the pressure. I don't think he expects Armenia to give up on the claims on Karabakh, but maybe Armenia perhaps to make weaker claims for Karabakh, to talk less about independence, and maybe start talking a bit more about autonomy and self-determination and less about independence. Maybe this is the strategy.
Yeah, Tom, don't you think that recognizing Azeri territorial integrity with Artsakh it's an impossible task for any Armenian leader? Perhaps it could be it could be done only after the Minsk group is able to bring the parties to the negotiating table to address the status of Nagorno-Karabakh. Maybe after that.
Yeah, no, it's obviously it's impossible for an Armenian leader to give up on decades of aspirations for the people of Karabakh. That will not happen. It might be possible to talk about in the future about some kind of territorial autonomy for the Karabakh Armenians inside Azerbaijan, but Baku is no longer talking about that. So again, we have these completely contradictory positions. We have the Minsk group still officially negotiating, but basically not able to do anything, and then we have the Russians on the ground as a kind of short-term stabilization force. So yeah, it's a very unsatisfactory situation, I guess, for anyone who wants to see this conflict peacefully resolved.
And also, why do you think people voted for Nikol Pashinyan? What his victory means for the region, for the country?
For Armenia, you mean, or for everyone? I didn't quite understand your question.
Yeah, I'm talking about, why do you think people voted, yes, Armenian people voted for Pashinyan?
Why did people vote for Pashinyan? Because I think, I think people, hard for me to say, but from Armenians I've spoken to, they were choosing what they thought was the lesser of two evils. They were voting for a government which had delivered some freedoms, which had opened the country up. They were voting for the possibility of future free elections. And they were voting, I guess, against Mr. Kocharyan and what they remembered from that era when the small group, monopolized Armenia and businesses were all owned by the small group, and ordinary businesses had to pay big protection rackets and so on. So I think they were choosing what I think an unsatisfactory present over an even worse past. That's my view of what most Armenian voters were thinking about.
And also, Tom, as Azeri leader said, it's unthinkable that any government that lost the war was re-elected again by their people. Yeah. And he's like teasing Pashinyan. The same line you would hear from Armenian opposition. Kocharyan and others would say the same thing, almost in unison. What's your take on that? Do you know any leader that was re-elected after losing the war?
No, but I guess, there are also examples, most famously Britain in 1945, when a leader lost the election after winning the war. So maybe sometimes voters have other things on their mind. Maybe I think they blamed Pashinyan, I'm sure, for the defeat. He takes responsibility for that, but maybe some responsibility on the Armenian side also lies with previous governments, their military strategy, or maybe their failure of a military strategy. So I think Armenian voters obviously took that into account, but they also looked at other factors about the economy and about democracy, I think, in particular.
But do you believe that, the war was lost also because of the failure of the previous governments to build up the strong army? I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, sure. I mean, obviously, on the military side, there was obviously a failure which lasted many years in the previous administrations, that the Armenian side was using, as it were, 20th century defenses against a 21st century army, which had learned new technology. Clearly, that was on the military side. That was a big failure. And I guess also one could, and here the blame is shared, I think, between Yerevan and Baku. There were many years when there were not serious negotiations, when both sides could have tried much harder to have peaceful negotiations and to consider serious compromises, and that never happened.
And do you think Minsk group co-chairs will be able to convince parties to come to the negotiating table? Will Azerbaijan accept mediation of France, Russia, and the US? Also, now we are seeing that another, international crisis is, emerging in a full-scale, crisis in Afghanistan. I think this will take all international attention, and Armenia-Azerbaijani conflict again will be forgotten, and it's very good for Aliyev.
Well, I think this has always been the case, that there's always been other, the Karabakh conflict has never been a first-order priority for internationally. It hasn't been at the bottom of the list, but it's never been a first-order priority. There's always been something more important, Afghanistan, like now Iraq or Syria, or always problems with China and Russia on other issues. So I think, it's not reasonable to expect that there can be a lot of international attention. But I guess the one thing to say is that it's clear to everyone, I think, that this conflict is not resolved. There is a deadline coming in 2025 about this, which is about the renewal or non-renewal of the Russian peacekeeping force. So no one can pretend that this conflict is now over. I don't think anyone expects the Karabakh Armenians to want to live peacefully inside Azerbaijan. There's a lot of unfinished business here. There's also the business on the Azerbaijani side of how those territories can be resettled and reconstructed. So there's a lot of unfinished business, and so maybe not today, but fairly soon, I think the Minsk group countries again will be forced to look at this issue and to try and negotiate a bit more seriously than they are at the moment.
Tom, do you foresee any military, confrontation in a larger scale in the near future? What's your prediction?
Who knows what could happen in 2 or 3 years' time, or in 2025, as I've been talking about. At the moment, I just think we're talking about little clashes here and there, ceasefire violations. While the border demarcation is not clear, this is obviously going to give occasion for fighting and for shooting, and unfortunately for people to get killed, but not a large-scale conflict. I don't think that's going to happen at the moment, but certainly there's certainly perspectives, unfortunately, for more serious fighting in 2 or 3 years' time, if not before.
What do you think about the possibility of destabilization of Central Asian republics? If, Talibs were able, to penetrate and to trigger the civil, wars in these countries, in that sense, Russia would it will divert Russians' attentions from Caucasus to Central Asia. And that there is even talk, even Ukrainians are hoping that Russia will be very busy with making this impossible in Central Asia, deploying more troops, more forces to Central Asia. What's your take on that?
Well, I think it's certainly true that Caucasus is not a top priority for Russia. I think President Putin felt compelled to act, if only to kind of preserve Russian prestige in the region and preserve some Russian interests in the region last year. But certainly Caucasus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia is not a major Russian priority. I don't believe that President Putin thinks about it every day. I think he does probably think every day about the United States. He thinks about Ukraine, about Belarus. And as you say, there's a growing security threat now in Central Asia, which I think indeed could push Caucasus even further down Russian list of priorities. That doesn't mean that Russia will abandon Caucasus, but I think it does mean that some of the people on the ground, maybe the Russian generals in Karabakh, for example, will have more responsibility to take action.
So thank you very much, Tom. Always pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, nice to talk to you, Harry. Let me know when it comes out. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Okay, take care. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.